Now welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that asked how you feel about the world between worlds in Star Wars. As usual, I'll also then be reading and responding to some of the comments left on the poll. So let's kick it off with those results, where we'll see that 13% of voters love the idea or think it fits perfectly, 38% are good with it and or like the concept overall, 21% then really don't care all that much either way or they're just fine with it, which leaves 17% who really don't like it or don't think it fits, and then there's a final 10% who think it's terrible and hate it being in Star Wars. And I'd say these results are about what I expected. Kind of got a feeling that most people would probably fall somewhere in between the two extremes, that a lot of people neither love it nor hate it, they just kind of think it's there and hope it doesn't get used wrong. Though I'm maybe a little surprised it was more towards the upper end, I kind of get a feeling this is one of those things that most people are leery of, I guess you could say. Again, they're kind of afraid how it's going to be used. It's not that they flat out hate it or think it doesn't fit at all into Star Wars, as much as they fear, again, what it can be used for, which we will certainly be discussing more in the comments, which means, yeah, let's get to those now, but not before once again just saying thank you to everyone who votes, comments, or watches these or any of my videos, or to those who leave questions for lightning response videos. Obviously, I get a lot of questions, can't make a video answering every single one, so thank you to those who do leave them, even if you don't get your question answered. Also, a huge thank you to everyone who supports what I try to do here over on Patreon. And so let's now get to those comments, starting this time with the top two, since they were very similar to each other and certainly seem to echo the sentiments of many. Anyway, the first one, and technically the top-rated one, came to us from Anakin Skywalker, who said, "It's hard to justify its existence when the only two times we've ever seen it were used to save Ahsoka, and nothing else." Also then this one from JMP, who said, "It was literally created just for Dave to save Ahsoka, that's all. The fact that you can save people from dying just makes death mean less than it already does in Star Wars." And the funny thing about the world between worlds and how we've seen it used so far, which is mainly to save Ahsoka, we have seen it a few other times used in more innocuous ways to communicate through the Force between, say, Ezra and Yoda. But anyway, Dave Filoni didn't have to come up with that to save Ahsoka. Let's keep in mind that originally, or from what we saw in that Season 2 episode of Rebels called Twilight of the Apprentice, where Ahsoka faces Vader, anyway, everything is kept vague. We don't know what actually happens after Ahsoka closes the door on Ezra. We don't know what really happens to her from just that episode alone, other than she apparently survives because at the very end of it we see her walking under the temple on Malachor. And considering we also see Vader kind of limping away at the end, not that he exactly could have ever died, but considering Vader survived, there's nothing to say that Ahsoka didn't simply survive as well because of reasons, and despite the temple blowing up. In other words, technically it didn't have to be answered, especially not this way, or there were simply other ways she could have survived, like something holding back the blast wave from the explosion, like we've seen other Jedi do or other Force users do. Anything like that could have worked about as well as her being pulled out of space and time by a version of Ezra from her relative future, and thus, despite what anyone wants to argue, introducing a form of time travel into Star Wars. And I know, some will say it always happened that way, that it's some kind of closed loop thing, and that not just anything can be changed or something along those lines. I've heard a lot of people try to justify this as not being time travel. Problem is, nothing stops this from being somebody from one point in space and time interacting with someone else from another point in space and time. It doesn't matter if some type of in-between place was used to pull it off. It is still an interaction between individuals across, again, space and time. Plus, technically, Ezra could have pulled Kanan out of that moment he dies. There was nothing stopping him from doing that, nothing physically stopping him, I should say. It was the fact that he would create a paradox and some very bad things would happen as a result. That is what stops him. Also, yeah, I do have to kind of agree with the latter half of the second comment there, that it does kind of make death meaningless when you do something like this. When in theory people can be pulled out of the moment of their death by people from, again, another place and time. And the fact that others have survived death when they really shouldn't have doesn't help this either, especially when we get explanations like this for it.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And it's almost ironic that in the World Between Worlds episode where Ezra does indeed save Ahsoka, that what he's supposed to learn there is that you can't change the past, that sometimes you have to accept things and let them go. Like he has to accept the death of his master Kanan and move on. And yet, in this very same episode, he literally saves someone he cares about from death. But anyway, let's now move on to another highly rated comment, one that relates to all of this as well. And this one comes to us from E.T., who said, "You'd need an option for, I'm okay with how it's been utilized so far, but fear it could mess up a lot of things if not handled carefully. To the point I'm still not convinced it was necessary for the risks it poses and had preferred it wouldn't have been introduced." And that, I think, is the problem most people have with this, that it's basically letting the genie out of the bottle or opening Pandora's box. That again, as I just kind of argued, you have now introduced a form of time travel into Star Wars, and there is nothing stopping anyone from using it again. And I'm talking more about the writers and creators than I am about the characters in story. I'm saying that it can be used as this tool to just undo things and render what I think is one of the best parts of Star Wars, one of the most important lessons it tries to teach us anyway. It renders it almost meaningless, which is that the choices we make always are permanent and have consequences, and that sometimes we make some pretty bad choices that lead to some horrible results that we will have to live with and or eventually face to try to make them right. That no, the past cannot be changed, yet the future can. That we have to learn a way to carry on and learn from our mistakes, or to accept the things that happened that were beyond our control, or that were choices made by others, going along with Kanan sacrificing himself, and Ezra not wanting to accept that, or even any guilt Ahsoka feels about Anakin becoming Vader because of his choices. It's all about living in the now and fighting for a better future instead of being stuck in the past or having the ability to go back and change it. Alright, and moving on, we now have this comment from Spurgicide, who said, "As someone who never really got into the more fantastical aspects of Star Wars, Filoni likes to incorporate Mortis, the world between worlds, etc. I don't have a huge issue with them so long as they are used well in the story, and in the latest episode, it was used well and I really enjoyed it." There's then also this one from Lobster with Internet, who said, "I feel that there's more than enough room for more of the mystical side of the Force in Star Wars, but that it should have limits on it that would prevent it from sliding into the what I call true magic. Magic that can allow you to do whatever you want with no real limits and makes most universes break down into incomprehensible gibberish while making stories impossible." And I do agree that you don't exactly want to imply that the Force is this entirely, I guess you could call it, open-ended thing where literally anything and everything is possible with it or because of it. Nor do you want to turn it into this more hard magic system where we know how and why it all works, because there are these very definitive rules which limit anything new or different from ever being done with it. And you do want to do new and different with it from time to time, of course, to keep things fresh and interesting. Basically here you want some soft, flexible boundaries in place. We want to know it does have some sort of limitations, at least when it comes to how people can use it or what it can do in the stories. But those limits still have to allow for expansion from time to time, but hopefully doesn't allow for things to get so ridiculous or out of hand that suddenly the Force can just be used for whatever, whenever, and again renders the stories all kind of meaningless because you can just use the Force to fix it. Alright, let's move on to this comment now from David Roberts, who said, "I'm torn about it. Part of me wants to use it to retcon the sequels and fix that mess, but it is probably better for the franchise in the long run if it just remains a place within the Force and not a means to create multiple universes, time travel, changes in the canon of Star Wars. That might be a slippery slope that does more damage than good in the long run." And as most of you probably know, I'm not a huge fan of the sequels, and I wouldn't exactly hate the idea of them being retconned or for some of the things in them to be changed a little bit. But using the world between worlds to do it, which in a way would actually kind of keep them in the canon considering they had theoretically happened, they had just been undone later, well, I think it would indeed cause more problems down the road than maybe we realize. It would lead to fans calling for everything they didn't like to just be undone using it. Every piece of new Star Wars content would just be fans arguing about if it should remain in the canon or not, which yeah, already sort of happens anyway, but now there'd be even more, shall we say, justification to tear apart the things we don't like, done in an effort to have them done away with or removed from the canon. And quite honestly here, I think they, the writers, creators, or just Lucasfilm in general, they shouldn't necessarily be given the luxury of an undo button. They should be getting it right the first time around, at least far more often than not. I've said before, I don't expect them to be perfect with every piece of Star Wars content, nor is it possible to please every single Star Wars fan every single time. We all have different tastes and opinions on what is good and what is bad. But I do expect them to do the very best to give it their all each and every single time with each and every story they create and whatever they introduce into the canon. And if they maybe want to experiment with Star Wars from time to time, then do more things like Star Wars Visions. Stories that clearly aren't canon and instead are interpretations of Star Wars where you can do whatever you want with whatever you want. Or you can always do what-if style stories. Have a series where a character is in the world between worlds and they look into portals and see how events would have or could have gone if a character had made other choices. I think that actually worked great for Star Wars given what I was talking about before, that one of the things that makes it enjoyable is that the choices made by the characters matter, and not only do they matter, but they can impact the entire galaxy. So if you want to have some fun with it, show us some of these characters making the other choice and what would have resulted because of it. But for now, let's read a few final comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from Darth Malik, who said, I like it as a way to visualize the Force and how it connects to everything throughout time all at once, but as a physical place where non-Force ghosts can just enter, I'm not really a fan of. Then there's this comment from Derhauster, who said, as someone who has only watched live-action Star Wars, albeit all of it made to date, I really don't know what it is. Its inclusion in Ahsoka held zero meaning to me, and I only knew of its existence from inadvertent exposure to it from social media. If I didn't have that tiny bit of knowledge about it, I would have assumed that Ahsoka was in the astral place where Force ghosts live. Also, we got this one from Boba Fett Forever, who said, I loved the concept and what I thought it would be used for, but now I'm not so sure. I think I'm more confused about it than if it was just left out of Ahsoka. Our next one then is from Eddard Stark, who said, I like the concept of it to erase the sequel trilogy from canon as being the alternate universe where Ahsoka dies, as a theory suggests. The one where she stays alive hopefully is the one where Luke is actually himself and competent in restoring the Jedi Order, not killing his nephew, marries Mara Jade, and the Vong invade from the other galaxy. Then we move on to this one from Nick Ripple, who said, it's pretty much how I feel about lightsaber wounds being survivable now. If you want your character to survive, don't put them in a situation where they die. Filoni loves Ahsoka, but too much in my opinion. He just invented the world between worlds because he didn't want her to die, but wanted a cool cliffhanger. No matter what happens to Ahsoka, I don't feel like she died because Dave would come up with another reason to let her live on. And finally, we have this comment from Seems Like Something, who said, it provides a framework beyond just Force Ghosts to explore past, present, and future in a reasonable way. I like it. It's almost like a dimension between life and death, where all of time and space intersect. It really broadens the horizon for the writers. My only concern would be, since Ezra used it to save Ahsoka, we know the past can be changed or influenced, so this does open up a can of worms, excuse the pun. That is precarious water to tread. However, it also allows some of the less inspired stories recently told to be modified in a way that may please fans. And yeah, I'm fine with that. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of the world between worlds, or what you think of what I or anyone else had to say about it here in this video. So take to the comments, let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.